guys, today we're going to be doing a full recap of Season 1 of The Bad Batch. So the finale just aired on Friday, so I thought this would be a great time to chat about the whole season. So sit back, relax, and listen along as we do a casual chat through the whole plot arc. So we start off episode 1 called Aftermath on the planet Caller, and we're put right in the middle of a battle between the Republic and the Separatist droid army, and we get to see Caleb Doom, or Kanan Jarrus, as a young Padawan. We also see his master, Deba Palava, and they're pretty overrun by battle droids, but the Bad Batch shows up and, in typical Bad Batch fashion, saves the day through lots of explosions. We see Order 66 being executed by the clones, and Deba Palava is killed, and Caleb escapes into the woods. The Bad Batch flees after them, and it seems like Crosshair is really out for blood. But Hunter and the other members of the Bad Batch don't really seem to be as affected, and Crosshair tries to kill him. But eventually it's just Kanan and Hunter willingly lets him escape. So we know that at least Hunter isn't under the effects of Order 66. Back on Camino, we see the Republic has transitioned to the Empire, and all the Jedi are being systematically killed, and the clones have a new menacing aura around them that wasn't present previously. This is also when we first meet Omega, who is, of course, as we find out soon, their sister, another clone of Jango Fett. We spend some time on Camino now. The Bad Batch gets into a food fight with the Regs, and eventually we meet Tarkin. Tarkin is, of course, very skeptical of the clones and whether or not they're worth continuing the program under the Empire. So he sends the Bad Batch to do a test in the arena where clones train, except this time they're using live rounds, and we see robots which may or may not be early predecessors of the Dark Troopers from the Mandalorian. The Bad Batch do end up succeeding without dying, and Tarkin is impressed with their skills, but still unsure if they're going to make it in the Empire. So he sends them to Onderon to deal with the rebel forces, or would-be rebel forces. Of course, they head over to Onderon and find Saw Gerrera, who's appeared in lots of Star Wars media like Rogue One, Rebels, Clone Wars, and they don't end up going through with the mission because it would be killing lots of innocent people, and this is the first time when Crosshair and Hunter really start to butt heads. Crosshair thinks they should go through with the mission and should have just killed everyone. Meanwhile, Hunter thinks that we shouldn't follow orders if we know that they're wrong. An Imperial probe droid spots them, and Tarkin knows that they didn't follow orders. When they get back to Camino, mostly because they want to pick up Omega, they're immediately thrown in custody, and Crosshair is singled out because they know he would have followed orders, so they take him and actually intensify the effects of his inhibitor drip. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad and Omega break out of their holding cell and manage to fight their way back to their this is also when we start to see a bond between Hunter and Omega form for the first time. Crosshair tries to stop them but is unsuccessful, and the 4 remaining members of the Bad Batch and now Omega are off of Camino. So this is where the episode ends. We're down Crosshair, but we've added Omega. So overall, I thought the first episode in season 1 was great. It was 90 minutes long, so it gave us a ton of content. It was pretty action-packed, and we got to see another Order 66 scene with Kanan Jarrus, no less. So overall, I thought the season started extremely strong. And before continuing, I just want to say real quick, if you like the content, please consider subscribing. I definitely worked super hard on this video, so every single subscription means a ton to me, and I really appreciate each and every one of you guys. So if you like it, consider subscribing. Alright, that's all. Let's get back to it. Episode 2 was called Cut and Run, which is, of course, kind of a play on words because we meet Cut LaQuain, who is a character from the Clone Wars. The episode starts in hyperspace, and the Bad Batch land on the planet Seleucami, which is again a familiar planet from the Clone Wars. As soon as she gets off the shuttle, Omega starts playing with dirt because she's never seen it before on Camino, and we head over to the house of Cut LaQuain and meet his family once again. Here we also find out, or the Bad Batch finds out, about the inhibitor chips, and Omega and Tech know about it and inform the rest of the squad. Upon heading into the town, we find that the Empire is occupying the whole place, and we see clones being pretty apathetic and aggressive, which is new. We're used to seeing clones as the good guys, so it's very interesting and almost sad to see them as the bad guys in the same Clone Wars style. But anyways, we find out that they're implementing something called chain codes, and Cut LaQuain and his family need falsified chain codes to be able to escape the planet. After going back and forth quite a bit, Echo, Tech, and Omega decide to just take the ship in and get it impounded to get the chain codes. So once they land, they sneak out of the ship. Echo fetches 5 chain codes, one additional one for Omega, who Hunter plans to send with the family, and Omega sneaks them outside of the impound lot, at which point she gives them to Cut LaQuain and his family, and we find out that Hunter wants to send Omega with Cut. After Hunter leaves Omega, he heads back to the ship, and him and the Bad Batch begin fighting their way out, and they're just about to leave, and of course, Omega yells, "Wait for me," and reunites with the group. So her departure from the Bad Batch was very short-lived and lasted all of about 5 minutes. At the end of the episode, Hunter and Omega have a heart-to-heart, and Hunter explains that he really just wants the best for Omega and wants her to live a good life, but Omega says that she wants to be with them and she wants to be part of the squad. Episode 3, Replacements, is more or less a filler episode on the Bad Batch side of things. They don't really do anything interesting. Their ship is damaged from the previous episode and they crash land on a moon, but there is some very good content on on the Crosshair Imperial side of things. So we find out that Crosshair is going to be the leader of the elite squad troopers. They are not clones, so the Empire is trying to see how well conscripted soldiers work, and Tarkin puts them under Crosshair's control and sends them on their first mission, of course, to where the Bad Batch failed, which was Onderon. Once they get there, Crosshair kills one of them in cold blood, and one of the elite squad troopers protests, and Crosshair doesn't hesitate to kill that team member as well. After seeing that, the rest of the elite squad troopers fall in line and follow Crosshair's orders and slaughter the remaining rebels. So we can kind of see how cold Crosshair has become, and his ruthlessness has been increased drastically by his inhibitor chip. Back on Camino, Hamasu and Nalase discuss how they're concerned that the Empire won't have a use for their services soon. Oh, and also, the Bad Batch manages to get the capacitor they need from a creature that Omega manages to subdue without any combat, and they escape the planet unharmed. So, from the Bad Batch side of things, the episode was not that eventful and a little bit boring, but on the Crosshair side of things, it was very interesting to see him just execute those civilians with no concern whatsoever. It was pretty crazy. So, good episode on one hand and a little bit boring on the other, so overall it kind of evened out. Anyways, episode 4, called Cornered, takes us to Pandora. The Bad Batch land and pay off the person attending the landing site, but he immediately turns around and betrays them to Fennec Shand. Fennec Shand is actually after Omega and doesn't really care about any of the other squad members of the Bad Batch. So down on the planet's surface, Omega gets separated from the rest of the Bad Batch, and Fennec tricks her and poses as a friend to get her to come with her. Hunter eventually finds them, and Hunter and Fennec Shand square off. Eventually, through a fairly long chase, Omega is found by Wrecker and sends her up the tunnel, but Fennec is not far behind and very easily dispatches Wrecker. Then we head into another fairly long chase scene, this time on speeder bikes, but Hunter finally rescues Omega, and they make it back to the ship and off to Pandora. Episode 4 was fairly good, not super revolutionary. We kind of started where we ended on this episode, in hyperspace, but we still got to see Fennec from The Mandalorian, which was cool. And we know that Omega is being chased down, of course, by the Kaminoans who want her back. Episode 5 takes place first on Ord Mantell, where the Bad Batch will set up their long-term base of operations, and they meet their informant, Sid. Sid, of course, will be the one giving them mercenary jobs for the remainder of the season. So they show Sid the hologram of Fennec, and she mentions that she knows who it is, but they have to do a job before she gives them information. Of course, the job is fetching a rancor, so after some action and some farce, they finally manage to subdue the rancor, and it turns out that the client that Sid was working for was Bib Fortuna from Jabba the Hutt's palace on Tatooine. since they did their part of the deal, Sid informs them that the bounty hunter is Fennec Shand, and she doesn't have a ton of information or know directly who she's working with yet. I thought this episode was decent. It introduced Sid and their long-term base of operations, which was cool, but a lot of the Ranker stuff, while fun to watch, wasn't super consequential, although I do like the world building aspect of it all. Moving on to episode 6, Decommissioned. This episode starts out with Omega practicing her bowmanship skills, so this is kind of Omega's weapon of choice moving forward, and by the end of season 1 she actually gets pretty skilled with it. So I think that was a cool choice of weapon for her. But anyways, they get a mercenary job for Sid, and the whole point is they're after a tactical droid to get separatist tactics. As it turns out, when they get there, the sisters from season 7 of the Clone Wars just happen to be trying to do the exact same thing at the exact same time. And I think this is one of my biggest complaints with season 1, is that there are so many happenstance cameos from different characters. The Bad Batch and the sisters duel it out between both each other to get the tactical droid head and all the police droids, and not too much of consequence happens, except for we see Wrecker hit his head, and he's kind of starts to say good soldiers, as in good soldiers follow orders, but he eventually snaps out of it, so that was kind of scary. We thought he was about to execute Order 66. Anyways, as it turns out, the tactical droid head was destroyed, so no one got anything. However, at the end of the episode, when the sisters part ways with the Bad Batch, we see them inform someone, some cloaked figure, that the Bad Batch are on Ord Mantell. The last few episodes have been a little bit slower, a little bit more filler and world building, but episode 7, titled Battle Scars, is when it really starts to pick up. So this episode starts off back on Ord Mantell at their home base, and we see Omega and Wrecker's post-mission ritual of getting their popcorn-like food, and then heading back into Sid's base, we see a cloaked figure sitting in the back. That, of course, turns out to be Captain Rex, who was informed by the sisters that the Bad Batch were here, and he chats with them for a little while about what's been going on, and eventually learns that the Bad Batch have not had their chips removed. He gets very defensive when he finds this out, almost reaching for his blaster in self-defense, but nothing happens between them, and he heads out and lets the Bad Batch know that he'll be in contact when he figures out how to remove their chips. So then, flash forward, the Bad Batch is heading to Braca. Now, this place might seem familiar because it is also where Cal Kestis starts out in Jedi Fallen Order, which is a game. Unfortunately, Cal does not make an appearance, but it's still very cool to see Braca again. They meet up with Captain Rex on the planet, and he tells them that they're going to head to the Venator to have their chips removed. They head inside, and after crossing a ravine in which Wrecker falls in and almost gets eaten by some creature, they make it into the medical bay. Wrecker, who has displayed number 66 goes first, but he takes off the apparatus and fully goes into good soldiers follow orders move and starts taking down his fellow members of the Bad Batch. Finally, he reaches Omega and is about to kill her before Rex saves the day and stuns him. Afterwards, all members of the team have their inhibitor chips removed, and Omega and Wrecker, who are becoming quite close friends at this point, chat about how sorry Wrecker is and how Omega knows that it was the chip that made him do it and he would never hurt her. Back outside, Hunter and Rex chat and part ways, but of course before Hunter heads back inside, he is spotted by the Brakra Scrappers and the episode ends. Leading right into episode 8, Reunion. This is probably my favorite episode of season 1. A lot happens and there's some awesome cinematography and music and one cameo which again might be an over excessive cameo, but honestly he's such a great character I don't even mind it. So we start out on Camino, where we learn that the Scrappers Guild have informed the Empire that they found the Bad Batch on Braca. Crosshair is being dispatched with a squad of troops to go track them down. Back on Braca, the Bad Batch have decided to stick around because they figured they can make a good score and get themselves a lot of credits to support themselves. They head over to the armory and find all sorts of explosives, and of course, Wrecker falls in love with proton torpedoes. Meanwhile, Crosshair, the elite squad troopers, and the rest of the clone troopers under the Empire show up on the planet. They eventually find each other, and a big standoff happens between the two teams. Hunter tries to explain to Crosshair that he's being manipulated by the Empire and that he has a chip, but Crosshair doesn't care. Meanwhile, Tech and Echo cause the floor to collapse, making a big distraction, and they're able to fight their way out. Also, Wrecker hurls this torpedo directly at this elite squad trooper's face, which was pretty funny. The Bad Batch escape into one of the ion thruster cells, which would end up being, as you might guess, a huge problem. Crosshair on the outside pins them down so they can't escape, and the Empire begins firing up the engines. The Bad Batch hatches a plan to blow the cell up, causing it to fall down so they can escape. It explodes right in the nick of time, and as the engine is firing, it starts to fall. The thrust stream fires directly into Crosshair's face, burning him badly. Omega and Hunter are separated from the rest of the squad, but manage to get back to the ship before anyone else. When they get back, they find many dead clones lying on the ground in front of the ship, and, of course, Cad Bane is responsible. Cad Bane explains that he's taking Omega in and doesn't reveal who he's working for. Hunter and Bane have this awesome Wild West showdown where they both draw their blasters and shoot. Cad Bane manages to get the better shot off and hits Hunter, whereas Hunter only hits Dodo 360. Cad Bane stuns Omega and brings her to his ship and leaves Hunter on the ground. Meanwhile, we see Crosshair has not been killed by the ion thruster, but is badly wounded and bandaged up. Finally, the rest of the squad arrive at this ship, and we see through the lens of Hunter's helmet in kind of a Republic Commando throwback scene where Hunter wakes up and he's being dragged into the ship by his teammates. This was a pretty awesome scene, and overall, this whole episode was incredible. I think probably the best episode in this season. Anyways, episode 9, Bounty Lost, picks up right where we left off on episode 8. The Bad Batch is flying away on their shuttle, and of course, Crosshair is in hot pursuit. Despite the fact that they would lose any trace of Omega, the Bad Batch have to jump to hyperspace or be destroyed by the Empire. On Cad Bane's ship, it's revealed that he is of course working for the Kaminoans, and he informs Lamasu that he is en route to Bora Vio, an old Kaminoan cloning facility. Back on Kamino, Lamasu tells Nalase that Donway is going to make the deal, and that Lamasu wants Nalase to extract Omega's genetic material, which is pure from Jango Fett, and then have her killed. Nalase is of course not happy about this because she's very close to Omega. On Cad Bane's ship, Omega tricks Cad Bane's droid Toto 360 into letting her out so that she can fix his leg. Once Cad Bane lands on Bora Vio, Omega escapes and is able to signal the Bad Batch and let them know where she is. Her escape, however, is short-lived, and Cad Bane quickly catches up with her and reapprehends her. They head to the meeting site with Donway and find instead a Kaminoan corpse, and out pops Fennec Shand. Cad Bane and Fennec Shand engage in combat, and turns out that they are a pretty close match for one another. During the action, Omega manages to slip out. She finds lots of cloning pods and weird-looking organisms. Eventually, Fennec temporarily disables Cad Bane and catches up with Omega, but Omega opens a pod and what appears to be Kaminoan-type clone thing falls on top of Fennec. Omega gets away again, and Cad Bane and Fennec Shand re-engage in combat. This time, Cad Bane gets the upper hand, but Omega manages to make it to his ship and steal an escape pod, where she leaves the planet. The Bad Batch arrives in time to pick up Omega, and the squad is fully reunited. Back on Fennec's ship, we learn that her contact was, of course, Nalase, and she was hired to prevent Cad Bane from delivering Omega to Lamasu, who had wanted to have her killed. Nalase tells Fennec that her mission is still successful. Lamasu does not have Omega. So, the last 3 episodes, Battle Scars, Reunion, and Bounty Lost, all kind of go together. And like I said, episode 8 is my favorite, but all 3 episodes are fantastic, and I think, personally, the high point in the show. The ending is still good, but I personally think that these episodes are better. Anyways, moving on to episode 10. This is reasonably so a filler, or more of a filler episode after the action-packed 7, 8, and 9. a senator from Raxus speaks out against the Empire, and Sid sends in the Bad Batch to rescue him. Not super vital to the story, but we got some cool action and we got to see the Bad Batch pilot and ATTE. Oh, and also back on Ord Mantell, it turns out that Omega is a master at board games. Not a crazy groundbreaking episode, but understandable after the action in the past few. Now, episodes 11 and 12, titled Devil's Deal and Rescue on Ryloth, are also very good episodes. I'm not going to go crazy in depth about them because I think you could spend half an hour talking about just these two, but I'll give you guys the overview. So we start on Ryloth, which is the home planet of the Twi'leks, and we saw it quite a bit in the Clone Wars. Jam Syndulla, a character from Rebels, is speaking on behalf of the Empire and trying to get the citizens of Ryloth to agree with the Empire and not be so resistant. A young Hera, who is one of the main characters of Rebels, does not agree with her father on this matter and goes with Gobi Klee to take a weapon shipment from the Bad Batch. The weapons deal goes sour, and on the way back, Crosshair manages to take out their ship with just a blaster bolt, and it crash lands. The Empire takes the insurgents, including Hera, into custody, at which point Jam is forced to act against the Empire and ultimately do what he knows is right, because he's kind of holding his tongue when he's saying he's on the same team as the Empire. Jam and his fighters attack the convoy that is holding Hera, and Jam is about to assassinate Orn Freytah, the senator, but decides to do the right thing and spare him, but ultimately that's in vain because Rampart and Crosshair take him out to frame Jam Syndulla for his assassination. That being said, Hera does manage to escape while Jam is captured. Hera then contacts the Bad Batch, and after some convincing from Omega, Hunter agrees to rescue her family. At that point, we get lots of Bad Batch action and explosions, as we'd expect, until the Bad Batch manage to break out Jam Syndulla and his cohorts. Crosshair and the other clone troopers set up a trap outside for them to walk right into during their escape. However, Captain Hauser, a new clone character that we met in this arc, comes to their aid. This is significant because it's the first time we see a clone disobeying the Empire and going against their inhibitor chip, so it's possible that there's a clone rebellion coming up and that the inhibitor chips will eventually wear off. Captain Hauser tells them to go an alternate direction and stays behind. When the doors open, he gives a speech about how he knows what they're doing is wrong and asks his brothers to lay down their arms and join him. Some of them do, not all of them, showing that maybe the inhibitor chips are wearing off on a few clones. Regardless, Hauser and the clones that laid down their arms are arrested and captured. At the end of the episode, we see Hera, Jam Syndulla, and the rest of the Twi'leks escaping the planet safely. Meanwhile, Rampart and Crosshair are chatting, and Rampart says that he was wrong to underestimate the Bad Batch and gives Crosshair full clearance to hunt them down. Episode 13, titled Infested, was definitely more filler, which is kind of more disappointing this late in the season, but oh well, I'm not gonna spend any real time on it. But basically, this guy named Roland Durand takes over Sid's hideout, makes a deal with the Pikes that goes sour, and the Bad Batch have to get back a spice shipment that they dumped. At the end of the episode, he gets his horn chopped off by the Pikes for the whole rigmarole, but at the end of the day, nothing really changes. Anyways, moving on to episode 14. The main plot of the show picks back up, and we start on the planet Darrow. We of course see a familiar face from Clone Wars and Rebels, Gregor, running through a forest where he's eventually subdued by the Empire's forces. Then cut to the Bad Batch shuttle. Captain Rex contacts them. One of his old friends has been captured, and he wants the Bad Batch to go break them out. The Bad Batch arrives on Darrow and begins scoping it out, and they don't find anything immediately. Eventually they get a reading, and Wrecker and Omega head back to the ship while Hunter, Echo, and Tech continue onward. They come across a huge Imperial base and spot clone commandos and a new type of unit that they don't recognize. They sneak into the base and free Gregor without raising any alarm, but after they break him out, they trigger the alarm and engage the clone commandos and new DK units. After a brief battle, they discover that the new units are not clones at all. They're actually conscripted soldiers. These guys are, of course, the first generation of stormtroopers. They then fight their way out of the base and run into a clone commando who looks an awful lot like Scorch from Republic Commando, but may or may not actually be him. They continue to fight, and Gregor gets shot in the chest a few times, and the Scorch lookalike takes a surprising amount of stun shots to go down. Eventually, the four manage to fight their way out of the base. Wrecker and Omega are waiting to pick them up. Gregor, Echo, and Tech manage to jump onto the ship, but they have to pull away because of incoming fighters, and Hunter misses the jump. Hunter finds himself surrounded by a bunch of DK units, the Scorch lookalike, and other Republic commandos, and is forced to surrender. Crosshair comes to visit Hunter in his cell and mentions he was hoping for the whole squad, but Hunter himself will do. Also, back in Camino, Nalase is sent off to join Imperial scientists, but Lamasu is held back and presumably killed because politicians are of no use to the Empire. It seems like at this point, the Empire is pretty much entirely pulling off Camino. So, on to the finale. Episodes 15 and 16 came out a week apart, but I'm going to treat them as one episode since it's part 1 and part 2 of the finale, titled Return to Camino and Camino Lost. Now, I was a little bit disappointed with episode 16. When I watched it, I thought it was a bit anticlimactic and nothing crazy happened, but I think it's mostly because it happened a week after episode 15, and it's a much better finale if you consider episode 15 and 16 at the same time. I think they should have just made the Bad Batch 15 episodes and combined the last two, and I think they would have had a much better finale. Crosshair activates Hunter's comlink because he knows the Bad Batch will come and try to rescue him. They arrive on Camino at Taboka City, and of course, the Bad Batch follow Hunter's comlink and are right behind them. Omega tells the team about an old science lab that she used to be in and a secret entrance through underwater tunnels. So they land on a pad in the middle of the ocean, head down through the tunnels, and they end up in the lab where their genetic mutations were modified to make Clone Force 99. They also meet up with an old friend, the droid AZ. Crosshair realizes that the Bad Batch have arrived for Hunter and begins to set up his trap. They're led into the same training room that they were in episode 1, where Tarkin gave them their challenge. Hunter and Crosshair have a pretty in-depth chat where Hunter pleads with Crosshair to see if he can get him to rejoin the squad, and surprisingly, Crosshair tries to give the Bad Batch the chance to rejoin the Empire. Meanwhile, Omega is discovered by one of the elite squad troopers, but it turns out that AZ is right behind and knocks out the trooper anyway, so that doesn't matter a ton. Back to the training grounds, Hunter asks how can he trust Crosshair, and Crosshair ends up actually killing all of the elite squad troopers with one shot to try to prove that he's being sincere. While that's happening, Omega and AZ hatch a plan to turn on all of the droids to try to give the Bad Batch a distraction to break free, and once again, the Bad Batch and Crosshair end up working together to destroy all the droids. Meanwhile, the elite squad trooper that was knocked out wakes up and sees all of the other dead troopers and says the squad is lost. On the Venator above the planet, Rampart and Tarkin talk, and Tarkin gives Rampart the clearance to start bombarding the city. Hunter, Crosshair, and the team have one final chat. Hunter tries to convince Crosshair to remove his inhibitor chip, but Crosshair reveals that he had it removed a long time ago, and everything he's done has been under his own free will, and he thinks that the Empire is the way to go, and they have to join it to win, and he's not being controlled by the chip. We aren't 100% sure if this is true, but it does seem like he's telling the truth. Hunter stuns Crosshair, and meanwhile, the Venators begin opening fire on Taboka City. This is where episode 15 ends, and episode 16 starts with the bombardment of the city. A clone trooper comes up to Rampart and informs him the city has collapsed, and has clear hesitation and sorrow in his voice, showing that maybe the inhibitor chips are starting to wear off, or something is changing with the clones and a rebellion is possible. Meanwhile, while the city has collapsed, the Bad Batch have found themselves inside of a habitable, pressurized section of the city and are safe, at least for the moment. AZ, Omega, and Crosshair get separated from the rest of the squad, and Crosshair is pinned under debris. Omega, like she does all the time, risks her life to save Crosshair, and they eventually reunite with the rest of the squad. The building that they're in slowly sinks to bottom of the ocean and eventually lands on top of the tunnel that the Bad Batch took into the city. Personally, I find this a little hard to believe that the city can be bombarded and this entire section would be able to still hold air and sink to the bottom and land directly on top of a tube and not crush it. But hey, maybe the Kaminoans are really great engineers and just made fantastically strong structures, who knows. Anyways, the Bad Batch used that luck to their advantage and cut through both the tube and the bottom of the structure without causing a leak and managed to get inside the tube. There's a brief moment where a turtle-like sea monster attacks the tube, but they manage to get the power back on before it does any real damage, and it zaps him and scares him away. The Bad Batch find themselves back in the lab that they were created, and Crosshair and Omega have a chat. It seems like Crosshair will not budge on his position on staying with the Empire. He does, however, offer a solution for escaping. They get inside of their original pods and float all the way up to the surface with AZ guiding them. I'm not entirely sure why. Some of the pods they double up, but for whatever reason, Omega is put into a pod alone. The charge explodes and all the pods are released into the ocean, and of course they all float up except the one with Omega alone. Her pod gets caught on debris, but AZ cuts the debris and starts pushing the pod up before running out of power. Omega pulls a classic Omega move and greatly risks her life to save AZ and breaks her tube and dives into the water. Hunter sees this and he's about to jump in after her and try to pull her out, but Crosshair pulls out his blaster and it looks like he's about to shoot Hunter, but he actually fires a harpoon at AZ and pulls both Omega and AZ safely to the surface. They finally make their way onto the landing pad they got in and look out over Taboka City at the smoldering wreckage, and Kamino, their home world, has been completely destroyed. They try one last time to get Crosshair to go with them, but he's made up his mind on staying with the Empire. Omega hangs back with Crosshair for a second and says thank you for saving me. And Crosshair responds, now we're even. The Bad Batch leave Crosshair behind to be found by the Imperial patrols. The final scene of the season shows Nalase arriving at some Imperial base to start research, presumably into cloning projects that will perhaps tie into The Mandalorian or the sequels. The final shot shows the shuttle and the base one last time before the screen cuts to black, ending season 1 of The Bad Batch. So, I know a lot of people were somewhat let down by the finale because nothing crazy happened. It kind of ended like it started. Episode 1 to episode 16 was still the Bad Batch and Omega versus Crosshair, but I think it's a much better episode, or finale if you consider 15 and 16 together. It really shows that the Clone Wars era has finally ended with the destruction of Taboka City and Kamino, and the Empire has totally moved away from clones, so nothing crazy or no huge deaths happened, but it was still decent. I do think there were some slower episodes throughout the whole season that are probably only feel slower because we have to wait a week between episodes. If was binged all at once, you probably wouldn't really notice any of the slow episodes or the fillers. So, with that in mind, I would say Season 1 was successful in setting up the show. You know, Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and especially with that ending, I think was better than the Bad Batch, but it took 6 seasons to get it to that point, so I think the Bad Batch can certainly get to that point, and I'm excited for Season 2 and future seasons to follow. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks a ton for watching, and let me know if you like this style of video and you want me to do more. I enjoyed making it, even though it took quite a bit of work, but thanks everyone.